very proud to introduce the 26th Secretary of the United States Air Force, the Honorable Frank Kendall III. Secretary Kendall graduated from West Point in 1971 and served as an active duty Army officer for 11 years. He then spent many years in government service before joining Raytheon Technologies in 1994 as Vice President of Engineering. From 2012 to 2017, Mr. Kendall served as Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, where he oversaw acquisitions and sustainment for the entire Department of Defense. On a personal level, when I served in Afghanistan in 2014 and 2015, Mr. Kendall's name was said many times every day in the role that we served, as he was very much involved in the important work that we were doing there. Secretary Kendall was sworn into his current position in August of 2021. He is an extremely busy man. We're incredibly lucky and honored to have him come all the way to Fort Wayne, Indiana, to be with us today. So please give the Secretary of the Air Force a warm Northeast Indiana welcome. It's an honor to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Good morning. I think it's morning. Is it morning? Yes. How's everybody doing? It's great to be with you. I want to echo what Congressman Banks said about the 122nd. We got a great chance to talk to General Soy on the way in, and you're leading the way, and it's really appreciated. The transition from the A-10 to the F-16 is a step forward, and it's an important step. It's very tightly coupled to what I'm trying to accomplish as Secretary of the Air Force. So I want to give a shout out to the 122nd and to Congressman Banks, who was an important leader in making all this happen. So thank you very much. I'm going to give you a little context as you go through the rest of the day. I know we're here to talk about innovation. My obsession in my role is innovation and modernization of the Air Force and the Space Force. I'm back in government after a few years out, and working a little later in life than my wife had expected me to, but I think for a very good and important purpose. And we need all the innovation and all the capability we can get to move our nation forward, because we are in a strategic competition, the likes of which I have frankly never seen. I often start my speeches by saying, China, China, China. The origin of that goes back to my previous assignment that was mentioned. I came back into government in 2010 after being out for about 15 years working in industry mostly, and started looking at the intelligence of what was going on around the world. And it struck me immediately that China was modernizing with the very clear purpose of fielding the capability to defeat U.S. power projection capability. I'd been in the Pentagon for the first Gulf War back in the early 90s. And we had demonstrated at that time a remarkable revolution, if you will, in military capability. It was a combination of precision munitions, wide area surveillance sensors, networking, and stealth. And we had brought all of those things together to the battlefield and had a success in conventional warfare that was not expected. It was dramatic. It was very dramatic. We thought going into the first Gulf War, first war over the Rock, that we would take 10 or 20,000 casualties. We only had about 200. And the reason was that mix of technologies that I just talked about. Everybody, including us, including myself and others, were a bit surprised at how successful we were. But everybody learned from that, nobody more so than the Chinese. And we've continued along the same line, basically. We've added to those technologies, we've developed newer versions of them. We've continued to move forward. But the basic concept we introduced then is the one that we still use. If you fast forward from that period in time, about 30 years, a lot of time has passed and a lot of new technology has been introduced in that period of time. The U.S. has been, quite frankly, a bit complacent about all that. We had such a position of superiority that we felt that our dominance would be an enduring phenomenon. China has been very smart about recognizing the things that we depend upon to project power. Aircraft carriers, forward air bases, and satellites, as well as logistics and command and control nodes. And if you can target those things effectively, then you can really counter very effectively the U.S. ability to project power. That was what I saw in 2010, that China was embarked on building a large inventory of precision long-range missiles launched from the surface, from the air, or from sea. Those missiles targeted the assets that I talked about: airfields, aircraft carriers, satellites, and other key nodes. And they were well along at developing that kind of capabilities. They had basically taken some of the technologies we had demonstrated and applied them to their biggest operational problem, which was keeping the U.S. out of the Western Pacific. And the way I describe this to people is that the U.S. was and is the most dominant military power on the planet. That is still true. But as you get within about 1,000 miles of China, it starts to change. And China's been working very hard for a couple of decades now, longer than that, to make that change happen. So I'm back in government this time because I'm focused on that problem. I was focused on it when I was in the Obama administration earlier. And I've got the opportunity with the Air Force and Space Force to try to move us forward. It is all about the application of innovation and doing it as quickly as we possibly can. The guidance I've given my acquisition people is we want to have meaningful military capability in the hands of our operators, transformational capability as quickly as we can. So the job is to identify that, work with technologists, work with operators, bring it all together, and then field capability and set up programs to field meaningful numbers as quickly as possible, not just individual demonstrations or experiments. We want to go more than that. So that's been the general guidance. I came back in about 2 years ago, almost to the month now. And the way we organized our work was around what we call operational imperatives. It was a list of 7 operational problems that we have to solve to be successful. And I'll go through it real quickly for you. I'm not going to dwell on this. But those are the problems associated with our ability to project power in the Western Pacific, the thing that China was trying to do to deny us the ability to do. When I came into the Pentagon, when I came into this role, I asked the Deputy Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Defense on my first day, what do you want the Air Force and Space Force to be ready to do? What problems do you want us to solve? What operational capabilities do we need to provide? And the answer in both cases was be able to defend against Chinese aggression, in particular aggression against Taiwan. But it doesn't have to be Taiwan. It could be somewhere in the South China Sea. It could be against Japan. It could be somewhere that violates or is contest our interest that we have. And we have a lot of interest around the world that we're trying to protect, not the least of which is the values and the international system that we put in place after World War II. And China is very much a threat to all of that. That's a hard job, the one I just described. But it goes directly into the face of what China was trying to prevent us from being able to do. So very quickly, the 7 operational imperatives. The first one was about space. It was defining our future space order of battle. We recognized during the Obama administration, and this was continued in the Trump administration, the Space Force was formed during the Trump administration, about to have its 4th anniversary, 4th birthday. And it was done for a reason. The fundamental reason was that China in particular, but also Russia, had been fielding a number of systems designed to attack our assets in space, our satellites. And it was gotten to the point where we could no longer assume our satellites would operate in space with impunity. And we had to change fundamentally. So the strategy was put in place during the Obama administration. At the time that I left, we were still working about, okay, how do we actually do this? What does this mean on the ground, or what does it mean in space in terms of what we field? You know, the Trump administration moved that forward. And one of the things I found when I came back was that a lot of the groundwork had been laid to modernize space and to move it into becoming a warfighting domain. But that's number one. What does the future space order battle look like, and how do we get from here to there as quickly as we can? Largely, it looks like much more resilient capabilities. Not small numbers of very expensive, exquisite satellites, but a more proliferated architectures with disaggregated capabilities so that the other side doesn't have an easy job of targeting 2 or 3 or a handful of satellites and taking out your entire capability. It also looks like the capability to do something about the other guy's systems that he's putting in space to target our forces. So there's a counter space capability as well as a space resilience capability that we need. So we're moving forward with both of those, and we have a number of things in the budget to get to that kind of an architecture. But the way I describe the Space Force in general is that we're a nation that essentially had a merchant marine and woke up one day and realized it needed a Navy. So this is transformational. This is a whole new set of capabilities. Interesting artifact of history is that one of my former programs in the Pentagon many years ago in 1986 was an anti-satellite system that the Air Force was fielding. That system was canceled. It was canceled because of arms control concerns with the Soviet Union. Congress intervened, actually, and stopped the program. We're back to looking at those sorts of things again. We're back to looking at threats in space and countering them in a much more aggressive and dramatic way than we have in the past. The next thing on my 7 list, number 2, is our joint all-domain command and control capabilities. This rhetoric, the idea of joint all-domain command and control, that we can integrate everybody together, make better decisions, bring technologies like artificial intelligence into play, advanced networking and communications technologies, and as a result of that, have decision superiority. That's a sound idea, but making it a reality is a very difficult technical and operational job. And so what I had observed from the outside was that we hadn't moved forward quickly enough in this, and we haven't organized ourselves for success. We haven't defined what the product is that we're actually going to do to reach some significant fraction of this vision that I described. So that's number 2, is getting that right, making that a reality as opposed to just an aspirational goal, and getting there as quickly as possible. Next thing on my list was our ability to target other sides' forces. Our mission in the military in general, on the conventional side at least, is to deter acts of aggression like we just saw in the Ukraine, or which we might see in the Western Pacific. Acts of aggression are about moving forces to attack somebody else. And if you want to be successful at deterring that kind of an operation or defeating it, you've got to be able to track, you've got to be able to identify, track, and engage moving targets. In Europe, it's largely ground targets. In the Pacific, it's largely maritime targets, but in both cases, it's air targets. So the suite of systems that we've depended upon since the Cold War to do that are increasingly obsolete and vulnerable to attack. Systems like AWACS and JSTARS, for example, in the Air Force. So getting to a next generation of targeting capabilities that is resilient and can operate against the kinds of threats that we now are faced with. Space is a big part of that again, putting moving target capability into space in a resilient, survivable way, but it's also, there are elements that are airborne as well, but more survivable and more modern and more capable than our current systems. The other side has emulated this in a number of ways. One of them is to attempt to do stealth. So we have to have capability against stealth as well. So that's next, is the suite of targeting capabilities. Working very closely with the National Reconnaissance, the National Intelligence community to make that happen, because the space mission for those kinds of centers has largely been in their hands. Next thing on my list, and it's something that's much more relevant maybe here, is the next generation of air dominance. And we were talking about it on the way over from the airfield. Before I left the Pentagon in my previous tour, I had started a program called the Next Generation Air Dominance Technology Demonstration Program. The name we gave it was the Aerospace Innovation Initiative. That program was designed to prove out the technologies that would be embedded in the follow-on for the F-35 and the F-22. That program produced X-planes, if you will, experimental aircraft to mature those technologies. But it didn't put it into an operational airframe. It was an experimental airframe with very limited purposes. But that airplane is now in development. It's called the Next Generation Air Dominance Platform. But that alone isn't enough. A study that we had done when I was in office before pointed to the fact that future air dominance would be about a family of systems, not just a fighter with the things that go into a fighter, but all the things that you surround it with to support it. And one observation from my time out of government was that uncrewed collaborative combat aircraft had become a possibility, a real possibility. Programs like DARPA's ACE program for aerial dogfighting, the Skyberg program that the Air Force had, the Loyal Wingman program that Boeing and Australia had done together, convinced me that we could move forward with uncrewed collaborative combat aircraft that would work together with a manned aircraft to be much more powerful and much more cost effective. And our analysis has demonstrated that to be the case. So this initiative is about the family of systems for next generation air dominance. It includes uncrewed collaborative combat aircraft. It includes communication systems to integrate those with a manned aircraft and with other off-board sensors. It includes new weapons. It includes other devices for things like electronic warfare, et cetera. And this will be a transformational capability for the next generation after the current generation of air-to-air dominance. Next thing on our list was those air bases I talked about, those forward air bases that are subject to attack. They're fixed targets. Everybody knows where they are. And the Chinese have fielded literally hundreds, if not thousands, of weapons to attack each of those bases. So there are a number of things. The Air Force's concept to respond to this was called Agile Combat Employment. Again, a sound concept. But that has to be made a reality also. We have to buy the things we need, the mix of prepared airfields, support equipment, pre-positioned equipment in some cases, hardening, and defensive systems, and some deception, so that the other side doesn't know exactly which targets to attack and can just overwhelm them with numbers. So proliferating our ability to operate remotely. A lot of aspects to that, something that we could address very quickly, unlike some of the other things I've talked about, which are going to take time to develop. You can do something about those air bases right away. So we've been able to fund a lot of that. Next thing on the list, I'm almost done, is the long-range strike capabilities. New aircraft just unveiled a few months ago. You probably saw this, the B-21, going into flight testing still later this calendar year. That's going to be the centerpiece of the next generation of global strike, long-range strike capabilities. But again, integrated with other systems to make it more powerful and effective. Then the last thing on my list of 7 was all the things we count on to go to war. All the systems that could be attacked, could be vulnerabilities, including our personnel system, our transportation system, our medical system, all the information systems and associated things that we depend upon to mobilize forces and get them into the fight. So that was sort of the 7. We were very successful at doing the analysis work to address those 7 and come up with recommendations. We've got about $30 billion worth of work in the 5-year plan that we just put up before the Congress that they're considering now. We've got about $5 billion in the next year, in FY24 alone, for these purposes. So I'm very comfortable with where we are. I'm impatient. We need to get bills passed. We need to get that money into our hands so we can move forward. There is not a moment to lose as we address this. As we've done our work, we've discovered that there are other areas we need to focus on, and we need to continue the work in a lot of the original 7. Other areas include electronic warfare, munitions, and mobility systems. One of the things China is doing is attacking us and is challenging us in each of those areas. They've got a widespread suite of electronic warfare capabilities designed to counter our ability to operate in the electromagnetic spectrum. They've got a suite of munitions that they've focused on, designed to exceed ours in terms of certain qualities operationally. And they're reaching out to further and longer ranges to attack our mobility assets. So aircraft like our tankers, which could once operate and refuel out of the range of the threat, are no longer going to be able to do that. And we've got to get to a next generation capability there. Lots of problems, lots of work going on, fair success in getting things defined and into the budget, but a long way to go. What we need, and I'm going to wrap up with this and then we can take some questions. What we need is new ideas, new technologies, new operational concepts translated into reality as quickly as possible. We have one thing, there are 2 or 3 things that I'm focused on. One is a sense of urgency about all this. I'm trying to inculcate that in everybody that I work with. Another is a focus on solving the operational problems that we have. We can't do things just because they sound cool and they're good ideas. We have to do things because they're going to help us change outcomes operationally. We've got to identify those things early and get them across the so-called value death and into production and into the hands of our warfighters. So that's what I'm all about. There are a number of other things that can have an impact. We're starting to look at how we're postured to actually, if we actually were called upon to go to war against a great power. You know, when my earliest experience, I was a Cold Warrior. I served in Germany in the Cold War. And we used to do exercises called reforgers, where we would move entire divisions, entire wings, at a moment's notice over to Germany and exercise for a period of a couple of weeks over there. We haven't done anything like that for a long time. We've lost some of that skill set. We have been using individual replacements for our forward deployments in many cases, as opposed to unit replacements. We have not exercised our operational readiness the way we should be. So there are a number of things that pretty much cut across the spectrum of the things we do that are not focused enough on the threat that we have today. So there's a transformation underway. I was asked years ago when I came into the acquisition job about a dozen years ago whether I thought of myself as a transformational or an evolutionary leader. And the answer at the time was more evolutionary. I thought that the acquisition system that I was overseeing, the technology, development, production, and sustainment, all those phases of acquisition, was not fundamentally broken. It didn't need a transformation, but it needed a lot of evolutionary improvement. And so that was the approach that I took. But I also made the comment, if you do evolutionary improvements over a period of time, you can achieve a transformation. This time I'm on the other side. We need a transformation. We need to get to the next generation, and there's not a moment to lose. As I build budgets, and we're in the middle of building FY25 right now, there is a desire to maintain a current force that is adequate to do its job. That's what the 122nd is part of. It's ready to go do its job if it has to do it today. It's going to be more ready and more relevant when we have the F-16s in its hands. There's a part of the job which is about the things we can field relatively quickly, and that airfield improvements that I talked about in the Pacific are in that category. Then there's the next generation of capabilities, which will take a little bit longer to get to. In my mind, we have got to get to that set of capabilities because the risk we're facing keeps going up over time. China's not sitting still. I have been impressed just in the last 2 years, watching them on a daily basis, basically, at what they are doing to modernize and to field new capabilities. The balloon, which we all got our attention for a while, does not scare me. What scares me is things like their nuclear breakout, their fractional orbital bombardment system, their very long-range weapons capabilities they keep extending, and the suites of sensors that they're fielding, and the full set of space capabilities that they're fielding, and the numbers that they're requiring. So we have a very serious problem to address. I'm very grateful for all of you, particularly defense industry partners who are here, for what you do, university partners as well. AFRL now has an arrangement with Purdue here that I think is a very positive step forward and will benefit everybody. So thank you for what you're doing. I hope I've infused you with a sense of urgency about this problem. We've got a lot of work to do, and there's not a moment to lose. So thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Before we open it up to all of you for questions, just a few questions for myself. You were received, to bring things back closer to home, you were received at the 122nd Fighter Wing just a little bit ago by General Stoller and others from the Indiana National Guard and the Fighter Wing. It is the crown jewel of our community. This community supports that base enormously, and we're so proud of the men and women who served there. And I wonder, to begin with, Mr. Secretary, what advice you have for me as the congressman from this district and for our community? What can we do more of to support the long-term viability of the Fighter Wing, the Air Guard base right here at home? And maybe talk about we're retiring the A-10s, there's an emotional attachment to the A-10 too, and now we're at F-16s, and talk about the importance of that, but most importantly, what can we do more of?
Well, thank you. A great question. 2 or 3 points. First, in my previous life, I was an Army reservist for a long time, so I've got that familiarity with the reserve and Guard components. But I've had an education, if you will, the last 2 years of understanding what the Air Guard provides for our country. And it's enormously valuable. It's very cost effective, it's very efficient. It's a very important part of our force structure. And unlike my Army experience, the Air Guard is ready to go now. The units in the Air Guard maintain a relatively high state of readiness by comparison. So you're a very important part of our force structure. I want to thank the 122nd and Congressman Banks again for their willingness to make the transition from the A-10 to the F-16. I was an Army officer. I have a pretty emotional attachment to the A-10 too. We were talking on the way in about, I'd never met an Army lieutenant, an infantryman, who didn't love the A-10. It's a great close air support platform for troops in contact, but it doesn't scare China. And one of the aphorisms that I've used with my team is, change is hard, losing is unacceptable. We have got to change if we're going to prevail. C.Q. Brown, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Brown, who's hopefully soon to be the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, has used the phrase, accelerate, change, or lose. Thank you. been a long day. Accelerate, change, or lose, which I think is spot on. What he and I have been trying to do together, and now General Saltzman of the Space Force, is to identify the change we need to make. And you're a part of that. You've been helping with that. You opened the door to start replacing F-16s with things we need more. And there's an attachment not just to the A-10, but in many places to fighters specifically. The Air Force and the Department of the Air Force and the country have a lot of needs besides fighters. And as warfare changes, we need other types of units. We need intelligence units, we need cyber units, we need ISR units, we need electronic warfare units. So I think the best thing that can be done, I think, Congressman, from your perspective, is help us make people be open to change, to recognize that we have to move forward. We have to be responsive to the threats that we see. Your leadership has been very helpful in making incremental change and getting us down the road of starting to retire the A-10 and replace it with things that we need that are much more important for the defense of the nation. So thank you.
You have a deep background in acquisitions, and a big part of what we're trying to do here today is build upon the defense base that we already have in Northeast Indiana. We heard earlier from executives from L3 Harris and Raytheon and General Dynamics. You have representatives here from Rolls-Royce in Indianapolis, Ultra Electronics, BAE, AM General. So many of them are here because they have a significant presence in Northeast Indiana. But the vision is to bring innovators from Silicon Valley, investors. We have a number of them who are here, their first visit to Fort Wayne, Indiana. In Indiana, we make things. This is the manufacturing mecca of America. More manufacturing jobs per capita in this congressional district in northern Indiana than anywhere in the country. What's your advice for us with that background as Undersecretary, now the Secretary of the Air Force? What can Northeast Indiana do to create more good-paying jobs and be on the front lines of defense innovation?
I think you're doing them. I think events like this are helpful. The partnership we have with Purdue that I talked about earlier. Obviously investments can make a difference. I'm bullish about the future of defense industry and where I think we're going to go, because I think it's going to be driven by necessity. I think as we get a greater understanding nationally of the severity of the threat that we face, I think that the Chinese balloon I mentioned was one emotional event for us, I think, in some ways. But the Russian invasion of Ukraine had to be an eye-opening thing to wake people up to the fact that these sorts of things can still happen. And China's intent in the Western Pacific is pretty clear. They're not, making it mysterious at all. So, working on the right basket of technologies, having that expertise here. You heard from the president of the university this morning, I think. There's a lot of good technical capability here at that end of the spectrum, the starting up end and educating people. So having the human capital that can support the types of things we talked about. There are a lot of economies, I think, associated with operating here that can help. And go out and build the relationships that you need. Make people aware of what you have and what you have to offer. And I think you've got a good start with that. I think this conference is a good example of what needs to be done there.
I want to turn it over to the audience to ask a few questions with the time that we have left. So Landon has the microphone. My last question for you, though, is about hypersonics. Indiana, we're trying to build the ecosystem here to be on the front lines of that important development. Purdue University, very involved in hypersonics. We have leadership from Crane here with us today. They're playing such an important role when it comes to that as well. Notre Dame as well. So we've got the foundation here to be a part of a larger conversation about hypersonics. But what else? I mean, from your point of view, where are we going when it comes to hypersonics, and what else can Indiana do?
Yeah, we're investing in hypersonics, and we'll continue to do so. Our major program is a program called HACM, H-A-C-M, and it's in development and headed towards production. The Department of Defense has a number of programs. Hypersonics are an attractive technology for certain reasons, and there's some, obviously they're fast, right, which is beneficial. You get someplace faster. But the main thing that comes with that is that you can penetrate defenses more effectively. You're seeing the Russians using some hypersonics in the conflict, and you're seeing attempts, some successful by us, to intercept them. So there are reasons to do hypersonics that have military advantage, but they're expensive. So reducing the cost of hypersonics is one of the things we need to focus on. Generally speaking, they're designed for fixed targets. It's hard to build a seeker that looks through, works with a hypersonic. So advancing that technology is important if we're going to expand their role in our inventory. So my take, and I've said this a number of times publicly, is that we do have a role for hypersonics in our inventory of munitions. And we're going to continue to move forward. We're going to field those kinds of capabilities. I don't at this point see them becoming the dominant form of munition that we have. China, and to a lesser extent Russia, but China in particular, has had a very aggressive program on hypersonics. Part of that is because of the target set that they face. And we don't want to assume we're going to be symmetric with China. We don't face the same target set. I mentioned the moving targets earlier and the importance of those. So that's a system for which you need a seeker that will work, track a target, and engage it while it's in motion. What the Chinese are coming after in many cases is stationary targets and fixed targets where they know where they are already. So there's a difference in approach because of that, difference in emphasis. We do need, obviously, to work on defenses against hypersonics. That's a very important area of research. And we do need to move forward with hypersonic weapons as well. But I don't have the same emphasis on it that our adversaries do.
First question.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for coming, sir. Rob Mitrevsky, L3 Harris. Question about urgency, your previous list. My business is in the space industry, so our threat briefings include things like fractional orbital threats that you mentioned. And because we're part of Missile Defense Agency, Space Development Agency, U.S. Space Force contracts, we clearly understand what those threats look like and what the urgency is. But the American public doesn't seem to really think about those things as threats. I mean, we spent more time talking about the balloon than the fractional orbital test. Can you talk about a little bit about how we get the American public to clearly understand that the threat is there and how dire it is and what we need to do as a nation?
A good point. I think in general, I mean, all of us can help with this, right? All of us can help explain to people why it's in our interest to have effective deterrence in the Western Pacific, why that threat is growing, how it's inimical to our values. I mean, one of the things that I do enjoy in my job, first of all, is that I get to work with people on both sides of the aisle politically who are very serious about national security and defense. And the committees that I deal with have very good relationships with Republican and Democratic members both. The one thing that, maybe the only thing that the parties tend to agree about, or Americans agree about across those divides, are that China is a concern. And China as a competitor is a problem. But I don't think that people grasp the degree to which a military competitor yet. China made some very significant changes in its military, and there's a legacy of China having a very land-focused and very technically unsophisticated military that is long gone. I mentioned the first Gulf War. After it, China transformed its military. It cut its army in half. It cut down, it started to modernize its Navy and its Air Force, and it created two new services. It created a rocket forces service, which is essentially all the long-range rockets I talked about earlier, nuclear and conventional. It created what's called a strategic support service, which is a combination of Space Force and Cyber Force, basically, an electronic warfare force, an information warfare kind of a focused force. So they transformed strategically their military to do what they thought they needed to do to protect their interests. We're not as far along, I think, in our own set of changes here. But that we need to recognize the seriousness of this threat. And I've been saying this for over a dozen years. I remember having a talk with a senior member of the legislature from the Senate side, and when I told him about my concerns about China, his reaction was, well, they can't build a good car, so why am I worried about them building weapons? You know, so my action was, well, let me bring you into a classified facility and show you what they are building. So I did that. And an hour later, he walked out with a very different point of view. So you mentioned classification, right? It is an impediment. I think we need to declassify more. The Chinese know what they have, right? So telling each other what they have should not be a problem up to a point. We don't want to reveal how we get the information or what we know entirely, but I think we can be much more upfront about it. I also think that there's a spectrum of things people say about where we are and so on. There's a history in the military in particular of being very positive, and very, we're great, we're wonderful, we're terrific. I think we have to temper that a little bit by saying, hey, we're being challenged. We're being challenged in a very serious way that we cannot ignore. And that's been going on for a while now. I was asked by a reporter almost a year and a half ago, I guess, when China and the U.S. would be at parity militarily. Well, their budgets, their official budget is a lot smaller than their real budget, and their purchasing power is greater than their budget would suggest. So I think it's fair to say, given that China is really focused mostly on one military problem, defeating our ability to project power, and that we're focused on a lot of interest, protecting a lot of interest all around the world, that given that focus and given the resources they're putting into it, they're a pure competitor from the point of view of resource application. When would we reach parity in terms of operational capability? It's very hard to know. And the reason it's hard to know is that a lot of the capabilities we're talking about are not obvious, and their impact won't be clear until they're tested against each other. I mentioned electronic warfare as one area. I mentioned seekers, the capability of our missile seekers and their countermeasures, the reliability of some of our systems, how well we've actually integrated our forces to work as a unit with technology. These are very hard things to understand and know through the best of intelligence. And we're probably not going to find out what kind of war reserve capabilities each side has until they go up against each other. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's going to be uncertainty going forward. Anyway, educating the American people about all of this at every opportunity is, I think, the only way we move forward. And again, our committees, the four committees that oversee defense, I think there's good agreement there. And that's a good core group of people at the legislative level. One of the things I did my first year in office, and I just did one of these yesterday or the day before, was take threat briefings to congressmen like Congressman Banks and show them at the classified level and put them in a position where they can talk publicly in a much more informed way about the threat. So that's another thing that we're doing.
Got time for one more question. Anybody?
Hello. So you talked a lot about change is hard and all these initiatives. Candidly, do you think the acquisition process that exists today can facilitate that?
I'm sorry.
So the acquisition process as it exists today, can it facilitate that type of change that realistically needs to happen?
This is one of my favorite subjects because I spend so much time in acquisition. The length of time it takes us to fill the system is driven by two things. Well, three things. One of them is how long it takes us to do engineering. And there, we have comparable capabilities to China, say. Mike Vickers, who used to be Undersecretary for Intelligence, made a comment. We were having a conversation about this exact topic. And he said their engineers work at roughly the same pace as ours, have roughly the same, a lot of them are educated here, to be honest. So one is the pace of engineering, which is an industry thing, which drives, once you get a contract and you get money, you're going as fast as you can, because industry is highly motivated to get things into production. The profit margins on production are much higher than on research and development. That's one of the things. Another thing that drives it is how long it takes us to get money. And there's an article that an op-ed I just wrote that came out yesterday, I think, about a legislative initiative I have before the Congress that would allow us, I'd love to have your support for this, allow us to move more quickly. It's essentially a quick start initiative. I mentioned all the operational imperative work. We finished all that analysis and defined those programs, and we're ready to move forward with the real work a year ago. And I'm going to wait another several months at least to get the money and the authorization to start all those projects. We could have started a year ago. So we've given up a year and a half, and in some circumstances we might give up even more, waiting for permission to start doing the things we know we need to do. The legislative proposal that I have before the Congress right now, and OMB and the White House supported this, would give us a quick start capability. It would allow us to spend a small amount of money to do the relatively inexpensive early phases of programs with no long-term commitments. And then while we're doing that work, we would make the case to the Congress for whatever long-term funding we needed and to continue past that early stage. That would buy us back a year and a half, essentially for free. So that's one of the things that would help with the pace at which you get money. The other thing that drives how long it takes us to do things, the third thing is the complexity of requirements. There's a great book out that I just read called Recoding America and why government's failing in the digital age. It's largely about non-defense things, but it does include a section on defense. And one of the core reasons is all the requirements that we lay on things. And I've been part of some of these programs in my past, where we assemble all the requirements we can think of, make the product that we want as complicated as we can make it, and then give that job to industry, as opposed to slimming down to the things that really matter to us and getting them fast. So discipline on the requirement side of the house, which is our problem, is something we should be doing as well. The way that manifests itself in non-defense projects is all the regulations and all the laws that are passed that have to be embedded or chose to be embedded into the software that people have to write. I asked this is a defense program, but it's of a different type. We had a failure of our human resources management program years ago, and I asked a contractor afterwards who had been the prime contractor what had happened, and he said they didn't realize until they got the contract that there were 100,000 rules and regulations they would have to embed in the software. And that led to an enormous amount of complexity. Their commercial product didn't need any of those things. So simplifying the product so that we get the essentials that we need is another very important part of the equation.
Thank you, Secretary Kendall. Honor to have you here.
Thank you.